Hello, everybody, and welcome to another article breakdown video here on the channel. Today we are breaking down Drafting Masterclass by Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. He is a world champion, multiple-time Pro Tour champion. He's in the Magic the Gathering Hall of Fame. He's one of the best Magic the Gathering players ever, and one of the best writers for the game ever. And he wrote this masterpiece all the way back in 2009, so a lot of you may not have seen it. And just in case that's a possibility, I'm going to be going through the article, and it's basically 8 advanced drafting tips that any player can apply to try and get better at drafting. Though he doesn't present them as 8 tips, I tried to do my best to count them up. So we're going to be going through those, explaining any examples that maybe need a little bit more context because this came out all the way in 2009, and basically just trying to help everybody get better at playing by sharing this great article. So let's get to it. Drafting is a pretty wide subject. There are many things that could be said about it. Today, I'm going to focus on the concepts that concern drafting in general, concepts that are not related to Shards of Alara draft specifically, which was the format back in 2009, as you can imagine, but present in every draft. I know drafting is kind of a personal subject. Each person has its own ideas of how it works, and like mulligans, it's not an exact science, but this is my opinion on it. And back then, mulligans were actually very different than they are today, but that's beside the point. The most important thing to realize when drafting is this: you draft a deck, not cards. Each time you look at a pack and decide what to pick, your decision should be based on what you think is going to make your deck better in relation to the 7 other decks at the table. So if you draft on Arena, you don't necessarily play against the people in your pod, but if you're drafting an FNM, you almost always play against other people that you're drafting against in pod, so it's called pod play, and so that's what he means by this. That a card is better than the other is completely irrelevant. What is important is what makes your deck better. If you only absorb one thing from this article, please absorb this concept. The second thing you have to keep in mind is that at a draft table, there's you and there are 7 opponents. I know sometimes you'll be in tables with your friends and such, but to me, there can be no other way. A loss is 0 points, whether it's against your best friend or someone you've never met. At the draft table, they are all your opponents. Their goal is to beat you, and your goal is to beat them. I remember when I was playing in my second Pro Tour, Worlds 2004 in San Francisco. He's been playing a long time. That's one of the reasons he's so great. It was the first draft, and I happened to be in the same table as Brazilian player Carlos Romeo. At that point, he was the most famous Brazilian player, not close. He had won Worlds in 2002, something no one else in Brazil had come close to doing. I've always lived far away from all the other competitive Brazilians, so I didn't really know him, but I knew who he was, and I admired what he had done, and I had talked to him a little bit in that tournament. The pods came up, and he was 1 seat after me. I was going to feed him, so that means Paulo was drafting here, and he was passing to Carlos, who was right next to him. So I was going to feed him. When we were going to the table, I asked him, "So what do you like to draft?" To which he replied, "Hey, you draft your deck, I draft mine." That stuck with me in a way that is still burned in my memory, and I can recall it vividly. There I was, offering him the chance to pick whatever he wanted, and I tried to accommodate to it, to have a cooperative draft. He just told me to draft my deck and that he would draft his. To this day, I always see people who sit by their friends and try to agree on a color or deck preference. Most of the time, it won't work. I even see people complaining that this is cheating. I don't think it is, especially since it's not even something good. What happens when you agree on, I'll draft Bant and you'll draft Jund? So Bant is blue, white, green. Jund is black, red, green. So not a ton of overlap in the colors. And you open Broodmate Dragon in 14 blanks. Broodmate Dragon, of course, is an absolutely busted Jund card. Are you going to pass it? Do you honestly think that the best option in terms of how good your deck is going to be related to the rest of the table is to pass that Broodmate so you can get Bant cards in pack 2? Because if you pass the Jund cards pack 1, they'll pass you the Bant cards pack 2. I cannot think that way. I know I would pick the Broodmate, and there goes your agreement. What's worse, your friend might not realize you are now in Jund or close to it, and just think the cards for him aren't coming, so he'll get all the Jund cards pack 2 and feed you all the Bant just because you agreed beforehand that that was what you would be. Besides, the person you are passing to should be able to figure out some of what you are by the signals you sent him anyway. You don't need a previous agreement. Speaking of signals, they are a very overrated concept. I see many people talking about it as if it's some sort of guide for your draft. I don't believe it is so. For me, signaling is a consequence. I often hear sentences such as, in a PTQ, this is the pick, but in a Pro Tour, you want to send better signaling, so you'll pick this instead, which is kind of like a PTQ would be a Pro Tour qualifier, so you expect the competition level to be lower, so you maybe don't expect them to read signals quite as well. So that's like why that would be an argument, but he's saying that he doesn't really think that's true. I don't really believe in this. It's not that I don't think signals are important. They are important and part of any draft, but most of the time they come naturally, and I think people give them more importance than they deserve. Not unlike the stop trying to mind trick people when you still make 5 mistakes per turn discussion from last week. So he wrote an article about that as well. Basically focus on the fundamentals in those regards. The fundamental thing for understanding signaling is to realize that there are 2 people you have direct communication with, the one who is feeding you and the one you are feeding. So the one who's passing to you and the one you are passing. So the people next to you in the draft pod. In case the feeding like wording doesn't necessarily appeal to you or make sense as much. Usually we just say who's passing to you or who you are getting passed by. But yeah. Most of the time, I couldn't care less what the person I'm feeding is doing. If we are conflicting, it's their loss. They must be the one to change their strategy, not me. The real important person to read is the one feeding you, as they will pass you the cards for 2 of the packs, so pack 1 and pack 3, because it goes left, right, left. The fundamental problem with signaling, as I see it, is that the person you want to send a signal to is not the one you are capable of sending signals to. This makes being able to recognize a signal much more important than actually sending good ones, since it'll affect your draft twice as much. Signaling basically means you see what is left in the pack and figure out what archetype people must be in. Since you cannot know what the packs originally contained, it works more in an exclusion way. Since this card is there, he cannot be in archetype Y, or he would have picked it. You cannot go the other way, though. This card is not here, so he must be in archetype X, because there is no way of knowing what was actually there. The problem with this is you cannot always know, because they didn't pick the Tower Gargoyle, they're not an Esper. So Tower Gargoyle is an Esper card, 4/4 flying for 4, which was a great rate back then, and is just it's like a solid rate now, but was really good back in 2009. What if they value Oblivion Ring, so 3-mana removal spell, higher than it? What if they picked Sharoom, which is an Esper rare? So there's not a little link here, but Sharoom is an Esper rare. What if it was a foil Tower Gargoyle? Because sometimes you can have a foil of a card and a regular version in the same pack. What if they picked Resounding Thunder, which is a red removal spell? That is mostly good in Jund as well. But then they got sent Agony Warp, so blue-black card, Executioner's Capsule, which is a black card, and Sanctum Gargoyle, and are now an Esper. So blue, black, white. So they move into Esper because Shards of Alara was a 3-color set. So oftentimes players will be playing one of these wedges archetypes, or the shards, the color pairs. I actually no, they're not wedges. They're just the 3 colors that are next to each other in the color pie. Because white, blue, black, stuff like that. But they're not wedges. They're just arcs, I guess they're called. I think. But yeah. You have no way of knowing what actually happened from one pack, and you will learn gradually as the draft goes. This brings me to my real point. Signaling is important, but it happens naturally. You should not make the wrong pick to send a signal, because signals in one booster do not mean anything. For the same reason, you cannot take an 8th pick Courier's Capsule as a sure sign Esper is open, so just a blue common that was 2 mana to play, and then 2 sacrifice to draw 2 cards, which back then was a lot better than it would be today. It might be that the people before you took Sanctum Gargoyle and Tide Hollow Sculler, so we already looked at the Gargoyle, which is just a little bit of a flyer, so 4 mana 2/3. You can return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand when it enters, so nice little value play. Tide Hollow Sculler lets you pick apart your opponent's hand. It's another artifact, and they're both an Esper. I mean, what are they supposed to do to send you a signal? They cannot pick 2 cards, so they're just still taking Esper cards, but because of the way the pack broke down, you get a thing. That's why you can't take any one signal too seriously. Many times I see people talking about picking a worse card because cards of the same color are there, and you don't want conflict. You should not worry about that. The person next to you should. If the pack has Flame Blast Dragon, so these are just a bunch of red cards. Flame Blast Dragon, Resounding Thunder, Vythian Stinger, Skeleton Eyes, Magma Spray, and Oblivion Ring. So Oblivion Ring is the only white card. The other ones are all red cards. I'll still pick the Flame Beast Blast Dragon, so a giant 5/5 flyer for 6 mana, and then it attacks. You can deal a bunch of damage to things. Just absolute bomb. I'll still pick the dragon. The following packs will not be like that, and the red will quickly dry out. The guy who is going to get the 3rd red card is already going to be forced out of it, or he will just splash it. So basically, if you're passing a bunch of red cards, you don't have to worry about it, because the guy next to you is going to get forced out of red by you taking other red cards. The guy next to him is going to get forced out of it by taking other red cards. The person next to them, she's going to get forced out of it by someone else taking red cards. So it's just going to happen naturally, because not every pack is going to have 6 good red cards in it, is basically what he's saying. This is even truer for this draft format, which is a 3-color format. I know some people would say, pick the ring and let them fight for red. I cannot agree with that. They want to fight for it, let them fight. They cannot win. You are the one passing the boosters. There's always the possibility that the next person thinks differently. In fact, with Oblivion Ring, it's very likely that the person next to you is going to pick it and let them fight for red. But even if it's a worse card, say Agony Warp, which I picked below Skeleton Thunder and Skeleton Eyes, so just the blue-black, just a blue-black card. The individual cards are less important for this article, but basically a blue-black card, which he picks below the 2 red cards. They might want to, the Thunder's kind of a Jund card as well, but yeah. They might want to avoid trouble and pick the Warp instead of engaging in the fight, which is good for you. I remember a long time ago an Invasion draft, which was, I think, like 2001 or something like that. It's an old set, where my friend was telling us how he had shipped a Shivan Worm. So back then, a 5-mana 7/7 trampler, even that had you return a creature to your hand when you cast it, was just an absolute monster. So huge creature. He passed it so to know that the guy on his left was red-green, and then proceeded to ship a bunch of red-green cards. That way he was able to manipulate the guy next to him to go to the colors he wanted, and avoided any trouble. In fact, what he did was just build a deck for his opponent, one he should have had himself. If there are enough red-green cards to force the guy next to you into that combination, well, wouldn't you like to be the one forced there yourself? The draft is naturally going to force them out of it if they are the same, and even if it doesn't, that's not a problem because you feed them. Of course, that doesn't mean I think sending signals is completely useless. For instance, when you have a card you want to pick and a foil of the same card, Unless it's a very expensive rare, the usual behavior is to pick the normal and send the foil. This is just a very advanced tactic, which is kind of cool to see these sprinkled in the article. That might enlighten things for the person next to you. It would at least send a warning that they cannot take it for granted that passing the Jund charm, so just a powerful card for Jund, means you are not in Jund. This is something completely effort-free for you and might give you some reward later when they pass you good cards in pack 2. Basically, the whole idea is don't hurt yourself to send a signal, but when you can send a free signal or freely avoid sending a wrong one, you might as well do so. Because basically, people are going to be like, oh, there's a Jund charm in the pack. I guess that means they're not playing Jund, but if they see a foil Jund charm, they might be like, oh, they could have taken any other card in this pack. This is just the foil slot. So just that's why that would work potentially, because people won't naturally, even though it could technically work in reverse where someone's like, oh, they maybe took a foil version of this, a lot of the time it just pops into their head more easily if the foil is still in the pack. Another point in which I think signaling is valid is when you do what Olivier Rule does, who was another fantastic player, which is to pick the land over a playable card. If you are picking the basic land, it has to mean you are not in the color of the good card you are passing. Most of the time I'll just pick the card though. Sometimes you just can't be sure you aren't going to play it. You might be short on playables and end up having to splash that 9th pick Cloud Heath Drake that you could pass to send a signal that blue is open. So it's a 5 and a 3/3 flyer that can give itself vigilance by paying mana. So again, the card quality is much lower back then, but still, that you can pass to send a signal that blue is open. If they haven't noticed blue was open from the way you drafted, it's not strong enough a card to convince them to move to it, and it might just backfire if they were already in the colors, or if you want to play it yourself in the end. In some instances, though, I think it is a very valid strategy. After all, you are helping yourself at the cost of helping someone else. And since you have 7 opponents and not just one, it's not a bad thing. So yeah, because you want to make your odds as high as possible, so helping out one other person doesn't really matter as much as long as you increase your odds a little bit. Another topic I believe is important is hate drafting. Hate drafting is overrated in local drafts, but it has its uses even in the highest draft table. Hate drafting is basically when you pick a card you are not going to play, just so that someone else doesn't pick it. You are making your deck weaker, but you are also making someone else's deck weaker. Since drafting is about having a good deck for your table, and not a good deck period, it is a valid thing to do sometimes, except people do it far too often. The one thing you must realize when considering hate drafting is that you are going to hurt yourself to hurt one other person. 6 people at the table are going to remain completely untouched by what you are doing. You might think that you'll generate a cascade effect that will make everyone's deck worse. That is not true. In the end, one person will have a card they would originally have, and all the other cards will be in someone else's deck. A different person, sure, but you don't care about that since you don't know who your opponents are going to be. So imagine you are solidly Grixis, which is black, red, and blue, and you open Martial Coup and Volcanic Fallout. Martial Coup is just this absolutely busted card that just can sweep the board and give you a bunch of soldiers, which is pretty insane. And Volcanic Fallout is just a nice little, deal 2 damage to each creature and each player in red. So if we rule out any possibilities of you splashing that Martial Coup, you should definitely go for the spell you are going to play. The reasoning besides that is that even though Martial Coup is a very strong spell, probably the strongest card in the entire block for limited, and it will make someone else's deck that much better, there's a chance you do not even play against it. First, you have to play against the person with Martial Coup. Second, they have to draw Martial Coup. Third, it has to matter. It might be that you play against them and they never draw it, or they do, and it only helps them win a game they are already winning. Or that it's not enough to win a game they had lost. The card you picked over the Martial Coup is not making your deck that much better. It's making your deck perhaps 5 to 10% better, whereas Martial Coup is making their deck 30% better. But it's going to be 5% in all your matches. So basically, if you're going to be able to help your own deck get better, then your deck is going to be better for every single game, every single opponent you play, every single round. Whereas even if their deck gets exponentially better, you potentially don't even play against them. They potentially don't even draw it. And so it doesn't matter as much to you as the incremental gain you're going to make for your deck. You know that this card is going to be present in every single time you shuffle your deck. Sure, you might not draw it, and it might not matter, like Martial Coup, but it has a lot more chances to matter because you know you are playing it, whereas you cannot even be sure to be paired against the person with Martial Coup. You make your deck worse in every matchup, so you make your deck worse in every match so that you can make what may be your opponent's deck for one match worse. It's simply not worth it. There are some situations, though, in which hate drafting is sound, mainly when you have nothing to lose. Sometimes you get a pack with nothing you are going to play, and in this case, you can get some value out of your pick by taking something away from someone else. Here, again, there are no friends, only opponents. If my 14th pick is between Banewasp Affliction and Rafik of the Many, and I'm solidly in black-red, you could well be the person I like the most on the entire Pro Tour. You are still getting the black card. So Rafik of the Many is just like a messed up band rare. You still get it back. The hard part of it is to decide when sending a signal is important and when hate drafting the card is important. You can see from this article that I'm not much of a sending signals person, so I'll usually just hate draft it, specifically if I think it has potential to be good against me in some obscure way. For example, I'd rather pick that late Jesse and Lookout that a slow deck could sideboard against me as a blocker. So Jesse and Lookout, just a 2-mana 2/1 vanilla creature, so no other text. Rather than take the land and send it as a sign that blue is open, since it's normally not a good enough card to be understood as that. But as a general rule, you could say that in pack 1 you should often consider signaling, and in packs 2 and 3 you can always hate draft or things like that. One exception to that is not hate drafting cards that are good, but taking those that are bad against you. Some time ago, I read about a trend to pass late cards that are good against certain archetypes, so that people might play them and beat those archetypes with the cards that are theoretically bad against you. This is where the article gets very advanced. Just if it gets a little bit high, like above your maybe skill level where you're at right now, just bank this away for later. That if you're, for instance, if you are neither green nor Esper, you might want to pass that very late Naturalize and pick an irrelevant card. So Naturalize is good against Esper because Esper was an artifacts deck. So that's just a little bit of context there. And Naturalize kills artifacts. And if you're not green or Esper, then you can pass the Naturalize because it's going to be good against Esper decks. Maybe the person next to you actually uses it. If they do, it's going to be a dead draw when they play against you. It might even be that they beat a good Esper deck because of that. And then if you win your first round, you get a worse opponent, because if you get paired against the person that's main decking the Naturalize to beat the Esper decks and you're not playing Esper, then it just helps you out by making their deck a little worse. The same thing happens with, say, a 2/2 Mountain Walker for 2 and a red. You have no need to hate draft that. It's not going to do anything against you, and it might make a bad red deck, one that is main decking it no less, beat a better red deck for you. So it helps against matchups you don't care about. And mountain walking means that it can't be blocked if your opponent has a mountain, pretty much. The same thing can be applied to very good cards that are particularly bad against you. Say, hypothetically, you get the chance to freely hate draft, that is, at no cost to you at all, a late pick Infest. So 3 mana, all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. But your deck doesn't have a single creature with 2 toughness. It's interesting that you pass it, so the person next to you plays it, and whatever they would play over the Infest must surely be better against you. So you pass them a card that they can use, but it's not good against your particular deck. He's getting into the weeds on hate drafting here, but it's kind of interesting. Another thing that people don't do enough is actually look at the pack and not just the card they pick. For most of the packs, you are going to wheel something. So wheeling is when you take a card like pack 1, pick 1, and then when the same pack comes all the way back around the table, you get another card from that pack. If you're going to wheel something, it's important to know what that might be. Whenever I get a pack and settle on my pick, I sort through all the cards I think someone can possibly pick. After the 7th, I know I will get something from that pack, and depending on the power level or the color of the cards, I can assume it's going to be 1 or maybe 2 or 3 cards, and then pick the next 7 cards accordingly. For example, if you are in pack 2 and you see 2 bombs, 4 removal spells, 2 fixers, and 2 bears, it's probably safe to assume you are going to wheel a bear, so you don't have to pick them as aggressively in the next 7 packs because you know you are getting one later. Of course, sometimes this doesn't work. Maybe someone is left with no options from their colors and picks your bear. Bear is like a 2-mana 2/2. That's just a general magic phrase. But most of the time, it pays to take the time to think of what you are possibly going to wheel. Looking at the pack is also important to discern what the people next to you have. This part is something I'm not very good at, but I'm trying to work on it. Some cards lose a lot of their value if you know they are there, and you have the ability to know if they are there or not because they passed through you. Even if you are solidly in Naya, which is red, white, and blue, not blue, red, white, and green. Sorry, red, white, and blue is Jeskai. If you are in Naya and you know for sure you aren't picking a card in another combination, it's important to make a mental note of the relevant cards you are passing. Relevant stuff being things like mass removal, instant tricks, pump, instant removal, Kasali Ambusher, that's like a flash creature, I think, and to whom you are passing to. The last point I'd like to talk about is concerning sideboard cards. Sideboarding is often neglected during a draft. Sure, it's not as important as in Constructed, but it still exists, and you should keep that in mind while drafting and playing. Sometimes it's better to pick a card you won't play main deck, but one that is a good sideboard choice, like Naturalize, over a marginal card that you'll play sometimes, like Dreg Reaver. So these are just like marginal cards. Naturalize is a great sideboard card because if you go against the Artifacts deck or Enchantments deck, it's really nice. I also see a lot of people who don't even look at their sideboard between matches. Sometimes you have something to side in, even if it doesn't look like a sideboard card. If your opponent is too aggressive, you might want to side in cheap guys to block. If he has bombs, you might want counterspells, or a discard spell you weren't originally playing. Make sure you always check or know what you have there. You have nothing to lose. I think these are most of the general concepts of drafting. Draft a deck and not cards. Look at all the cards in the pack and not just what you are picking. Don't worry too much about sending signals because that comes naturally. And don't over hate draft, but always keep it in mind as a possibility to gain value out of a bad pack. I hope you've enjoyed it and see you next week. Anyway, that is going to do it for this article breakdown video. Hopefully you found something useful in here. I think when I was reading through it, I categorized it as 8 tips. So let me know which thing you found the most helpful. Remember, draft a deck and not cards. So if you made it all the way till the end of the video, in the comment section down below, leave hashtag deck not cards to let me know you made it to the end and enjoyed the video, because that's a cool little way to let me know. That's gonna do it for this one though. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll link this article in the description if you want to read it, but that's gonna do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.